Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this event with ConservativeHome in partnership with the Port of Dover on delivering the competitive edge for global Britain through the Dover Straits. Thank you to all of you joining us in the room this morning and to everyone who's watching via the app and the ConservativeHome YouTube channel at home as well. If you are using the app, you can send questions through via Slido, and that'll come through to us here when we get to the Q&A later on. My name's Angus Wyatt. I'm the Commercial Director at ConservativeHome, but you're not here to hear from me. We don't even have a name for me. So I will introduce our lovely panellists this morning. So I'm very pleased on my left here to have Elizabeth de Jong from Logistics UK. Thank you very much. Huw Merriman MP, who's obviously the Chair of the Transport Select Committee, and Doug Bannister from Port of Dover as well. So we will have kind of time for questions later on, but we'll sort of kick off with sort of going through everyone's sort of perspectives on the role, or the very important role, that the Port of Dover plays in our trade and our supply chains. Obviously, supply chains have been very much in the news of late, I think over the last 3 or 4 years in particular, but very much over the last few months as well, and thinking about kind of how they are affected, how they can be impacted, and ways to kind of keep resilience in the system, and the role that Dover plays in that. So probably a good idea if we can to kick off with you, Doug, from your perspective, in terms of the role that Dover does play.
Yeah, thank you very much, Angus. So the Port of Dover, we facilitate over £120 billion of trade every year. That's about 17% of the UK's trade in goods. Up to 10,000 lorries each and every day pass through our port, supplying the entire nation. So about half of our freight is destined for north of London. One of the reasons why we have such a prominent position is our geographic position. We're only 22 miles away from the largest trading partner that the nation has. And that geographic proximity is just so important to be able to ensure that we have the high frequencies, high resilient, high capacity services that we offer. And what that enables then is this trade superhighway to exist. We in the port, we attracted a whole lot of attention during the Brexit and during the COVID, because many people, in fact, most people across the nation, just recognize how pivotal the success is in this country, is as long as the Port of Dover is functioning well. And we were certainly sat down in Dover. We were, all of us, the entire, everybody that worked down the port was just so focused on keeping open, keeping safe, making certain the traffic continued to flow, because it just had to, and it did. Now, through this, we time and time again, we prove ourselves in this incredible resilience that we offer, and that, in fact, it's that resilience where the market chooses us, because they know that it's always moving and it's always happening. And if they miss a ferry, there's another one an hour later, so they'll just pick that up and come across. So it's just this continuing functioning. And you guys would have seen the events of last Christmas down in Dover, right? 2020, what a horrible year, and it wasn't going to go down without a fight, and it was a doozy. But geez, I'll tell you what, once things opened up, we were able to get the traffic moving again very swiftly. We were able to get 3,500 stranded drivers home and functioning, and we were able to make certain that the trade continued. I think if we take a look at where the interest in Dover is, there's a high interest in making further investments into it. We've got new ferries joining the route, new slot charter arrangement between P&O and DFDS. We have a brand new operator that started up Irish Ferries. Now, they wouldn't be investing in this route if they didn't see the market importance and the opportunity that it presents them. So, we've been at the forefront of both Brexit and COVID challenges. Now, one of the things is we start thinking about what do we need to maintain this success for the nation going forward? And certainly what we need is some infrastructure investment. Back in 2018, we identified a new set of border controls that were needed to be implemented. Now, what arises from the UK departing the European Union is higher transaction times. So you have to wet stamp passports as you're going through the border facilities. And with higher transaction times, that means in order to maintain the flow, we need more booths. So we identified this outbound controls project where we sought a bit of government funding to be able to get that, to get it moving. Regrettably, folks will have seen what happened with the Port Infrastructure Fund, no doubt. Is she okay? She's fine. Okay. The other thing that I wanted to highlight was something called the entry-exit system. This is something that Europe is bringing into force next year in May. Now, the entry-exit system is a set of biometric checks for passports as you go through the border control process, which is a very good thing. It should smooth things, and it should make it a lot more robust and resilient. Now, the thing is the current thinking around the EES scheme is going to work well in an airport or in a rail terminal. Nice, well-lit hall where passengers present themselves orderly, one at a time, in front of a kiosk to get the biometrics done. There isn't anything designed for a carload of people on a dark, stormy night going through a ferry terminal. Nothing designed. Guys, it's coming in May. This is something that we need our government to get a grip of, because if it doesn't, it's going to create huge challenges. As it is right now, people would have to get out of their vehicles in busy traffic lanes. Think about asking people to get out of their cars on the M25. Okay, maybe when Insulate Britain's around, they do it anyway. But to get out of the car in a busy traffic lane, that is just, we can't have that. That is just too dangerous. So what we need is our government, somewhere in our government, to take a hold of the challenge, work with the French, work with the European Union to come up with a solution for us. I think that's my introduction.
Great, thank you very much. It certainly sounds like it's been a busy few years at Dover, so and only just getting started as well. Huw, from your perspective on the sort of transport side of things, obviously we've heard from Doug there on the really important role that Dover plays through transport logistics, and as we said, thinking back to Christmas last year and all the preparations for Brexit and stacking up lorry parks and everything else. For you, what are the sort of transport specific challenges presented or opportunities presented by kind of the setup at Dover?
Well, I mean, immense, but actually I think it's also the key factor that we consider, the security that Dover offers us in terms of our food security, our trade security. And I think we've seen this during the international travel fiasco, if I call it that we haven't properly guarded our ports and our airports in a manner that perhaps Europeans do. They regard it as an absolute logistical security hub that's actually key to government. And I think, of course, it's a private enterprise, and it's right that we allow private enterprise to flourish. But when the government doesn't control it, then actually sometimes the government just leaves it to one side. And I think Doug has described two particular challenges. Funding for the project that you talked about, where Dover has received a woeful amount compared to other ports, and also the need to continue to engage with mainland Europe, because the reality is that I think the figure before Brexit was 43% of everything that we export went to mainland Europe. In fact, a few months ago, that figure went back over 50%, which was actually quite interesting. It doesn't tell you that that's a long-term trend because of the pandemic, but certainly it shows there's so much trade. And then also, I think strategically, it's really important for us to work with some of our other partners in the EU. So 40% of what Ireland sends out of Ireland actually comes through Dover as well. So it means that with the Irish, we have friends, not just politically, but also economically. They need Dover as much as we need Dover. And certainly with the committee, when we've had Operation Stack and other issues, and we've said, look, we're so reliant on Dover, what can we do to broaden the base? Because as Doug says, a lot of the warehousing is in the Midlands, in the north. But the reality is that, and Elizabeth will tell us more about this, we have a just-in-time logistics industry that quite frankly isn't wanting to go up north in order to go even further across the sea. It doesn't make any sense at all. And as a result, it makes Dover even more important now than it was in the years gone back. And Dover, in terms of its roll-on, roll-off share of the market, has now gone up from 50% to 75%. So it just, in a way, if you listen to private enterprise, it tells you where it wants to go. It wants to go through Dover. So the key for us now is to ensure that Dover has everything it needs. And I think it's about government pressing every single lever it has at its disposal. I think the fuel crisis of the last week tells us a couple of interesting things. Firstly, there is more the government can do to move a few levers. But secondly, actually, the government doesn't own the fuel crisis. The fuel crisis is there because we haven't got what we need inside private industry. The market needs to change to allow that to happen. Sometimes when government intervenes too much, then actually things go wrong. You know, we do not live in the Soviet state in the 70s where the government organises how much is made and where it's sold. So it's important that government actually backs off and doesn't get things wrong. I will just save my last remark to the importance of working with mainland Europe. You know, to me, it was quite fascinating when we had the Amber Plus list that the French went on, which made no rationale at all when you look at the evidence. Then there is a knock-on effect in terms of our relations with France and therefore Doug's ability to get all the trade through that we need. And actually we saw that with migrant crossings as well. You know, every time you rattle the French politically, it may go down brilliantly, particularly at election time, but there is a knock-on effect for all of our businesses that are trying to get our trade through and those that are trying to make things and export them. Because the reality is, and Doug, and I'm going to do this to Elizabeth, Doug's rolled the statistics out that we would have rolled out. But there was one that I did see, which I think is 110 miles of lorries per day is what Dover delivers to us. And we must never forget that. So I think the message, you know, from me, from the Select Committee is invest in Dover, because the reality is that's where private industry wants to go. Europe is still our main market. Yes, we open up international trade. I welcome these new trade deals that we're putting in place. I think they're fantastic and allows us to deliver more. But the reality is, if you look around the globe, the US, about a third of everything it produces, it sends up to Canada or down to Mexico, because it's all about regions. And that will continue to be the case. So we've got to invest in Dover, and we've got to allow Dover to invest in itself and not intervene too much.
Thank you very much, Huw. And I think that sort of that piece on kind of where we are with global trade and the sort of trade deals are coming down the line, as well as the kind of current opportunities and further long-standing opportunities through the Port of Dover, I think is something that we'll come on to the sort of questions later on. So Elizabeth, you sort of obviously heard the kind of the Dover side of it, the transport side of it. Obviously, as Huw said, the logistics is obviously kind of a very key part of what Dover is all about. And with that warehousing and how we get things around the country and those just-in-time supply chains, which are so crucial. And as we saw last Christmas and potentially, you know, hopefully won't, but may see again this Christmas, just how vital the kind of logistics side of this is. So from your perspective, kind of,
yeah, certainly. I'll be able to pick up some of the themes that Doug and Huw have spoken about, but also give our wider perspective and also our government relationship perspective on those. So in the UK, we do have a modern, efficient maritime logistics sector, and our aim is to make it even more dynamic and modern and efficient. So we definitely support fast, fluid trade through all our ports, and the short straits, both the maritime routes through Dover and also the rail links via Eurotunnel, represent one of our most vital trade routes. And we're wanting to therefore see for that long-term multimodal package of measures to really make sure that there is the resilience that we've been talking about through those short straits. We've heard about the superhighways that Doug has spoken about. There's definitely importance. We saw the importance before Brexit. We've seen it through the Brexit. We were going to see it after Brexit. And we're going to also see that importance and that resilience in the short straits for COVID recovery as well. Logistics UK, we've put together our own vision for the future of logistics. And there's a number of key principles which are something that's flexible, resilient, it's recognised in its value, optimal in its efficiency, and then working through zero negativities, environmental and safety. And been really delighted to see so many of those, that vision mirrored in the Department for Transport's view on what freight should be in the future as well. They're using very similar words: efficient, attractive, affordable, adaptable and sustainable. So that should be our vision. It should be the government's vision for maritime trade, for international road, for our ports, and therefore the vision that we have for Dover, and government should have that for Dover. It's their stated vision for freight as well. So we therefore need the road network to be like that. We need the rail network to be like that. We need the IT systems, we need the regulatory systems, we need the operational processes all to be those very words: efficient, attractive, affordable, adaptable and sustainable as well. We saw a threat to that during Brexit, but we overcame that by pragmatic decision-making in the UK government and also the EU government decision-making, as well as a huge amount of work behind the scenes. But we've got that bump again in the road with the EU's entry and exit system. So we've heard everybody, including your HGV driver, has to get out of their cars or their lorries to have those biometric and digital profilings undertaken by French officials. So that's not efficient, it's not attractive, it's not any of those things. So it really does need that pragmatic decision making that we were able to do before Brexit applied again to that, to find a different way of doing it as well. You wanted some stats, so we have to remember our vision for that 17-mile queue, and that's just 2 minutes of extra processing time. So that's those queues all the way up to Ashford as well. But in the longer term, there are good things ahead. We will get over that bump. I'm sure we will. We have to be pragmatic again, EU, UK decision makers as well, and French decision makers. So longer term, we've got the potential of adopting strategic freight corridors and looking at the UK's trade flows in a different way and investing to make sure that we've got resilient journey times and really good connectivity to boost the competitiveness of our nation. And the other good thing we have to look ahead to in the future is the government's 2025 border strategy. So wanting to be the world's most effective border. We support all the transformations and the objectives of that project, and we want them delivered earlier. They can be delivered earlier, and we've asked for them to be delivered earlier in our comprehensive spending review response. So single trade window, trusted trader programme, and the quicker those changes come in, the quicker we can move towards that fabulous vision of the future that we have, but also the UK government does have.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. And I think the word that we've heard actually from all three of you quite a lot is resilience. And I think that's the kind of the key factor as to why Dover can sort of keep surviving and keep kind of reinventing itself. And I think you've obviously been faced with the logistical challenges and the sort of the checks and the challenges and changes around Brexit, and then were hit very almost immediately afterwards, or sort of at the same time with COVID as well. How does that resilience help in terms of the sort of the post-pandemic recovery and the role that Dover plays? And I think maybe Doug, if you want to sort of kick us off with this.
Thanks, Angus. I think that there's a lot of things that need to happen for success in post-COVID times, right? One of the things that we have found is the overall supply chain resilience into the nation, right? Look what happens when there's a little bit of a spike in demand in fuel, right? We all feel it. That's because there's not the capacity resilience that exists there, but also we have a ever-giving large container ship stuck in the Suez. We have U.S. West Coast port congestion, Chinese ports closing because of COVID. All of this is really providing a tremendous amount of attention on the supply chains in and out of the nation. Now, where Dover has a distinct benefit in doing this is this high pace, high frequency, it's always moving. So if there is a bit of congestion elsewhere in the system, then what that does mean is we start to see traffic flows through the short straits increase. And the reason for that is that there's a good example. In large container ports, you will have, or unaccompanied trailer ports, you will have inbound dwell times of, if it's fast, maybe 6 hours. If it's slow, normal, maybe a day, 2 days, and if it's very long, it might be 3-5 days, while some of the containers or the unaccompanied trailers stick around. In Dover, our inbound dwell time is on average 5 minutes. The pace is what keeps it going. We turn our ferries around. A ferry comes in with 120, 140 lorries on it. It comes into the port, it unloads, it reloads, it goes back out in 45 minutes. That's faster than an A320 EasyJet on the ground, right? And it's the whole system is geared around providing that tremendous benefit that the market continues to desire, that it needs to make certain that the perishables are coming in, the components are coming in, they're making it to the factories just in time, just in sequence. It is an incredible amount of machinery that has been built up around the short straits because of the benefits that it provides.
Thanks, Doug. And I think it's an interesting point that you make about how well developed that system is, and how, as Elizabeth said, it's kind of a minute's difference can lead to kind of miles of tailbacks and everything else. It obviously has to be a very efficient system. I think touching on something that you said, Huw, about kind of funding and sort of that sort of disconnect slightly between the Port of Dover being a private enterprise, but then needing government support as well to kind of help facilitate the system. Is funding the answer? Is it just a case of put more money into it, or is there something else that needs to be done?
Look, so it's part of it. So the fund that Doug's organisation have applied for, obviously it's a government fund, and if that funding's there, that helps you invest. So yes, that's part of it. But I was actually struck by Doug's 45-minute to turn a ferry round. And this, again, is where government can actually get it wrong. Not by funding, but actually by its resourcing or its sluggish method of delivery. So Border Force, when you come into an airport, I don't know how it is with Dover, have a target time of 45 minutes for one person to come into arrivals. And not only is that a target time, they will effectively slow it up if it looks like they're actually not, they're doing it too quickly. Whereas actually the airports have about a 5 to 10 minute target time to get you out. And that, to me, is the difference between the public sector and the private sector. And I work in the public sector, so maybe I'm sluggish as well. But you know, when your next meal actually relies upon the business, the profits, to keep people in work, then you do work to time. When actually you're working perhaps in the public sector, where it might actually defeat your enterprise if you do things too efficiently, because you may not be needed, then all of a sudden you're a drain. And so I think that there are two things government needs to do. Yes, fund, where we can actually help Dover to help all of our businesses export, because that's all about our infrastructure. But secondly, what can government do to be more efficient and actually be by the side of Elizabeth's businesses, Doug's business, to allow it to succeed?
And I think that leads on very well to my next question to Elizabeth, just in terms of what is the logistics companies and freight companies, what do they need to help the supply chain, kind of to minimise disruption in the supply chain and keep it running as efficiently as it does?
Yes, every single mode of transport is public sector, private sector interface. Most of it's delivered by the private sector, but somewhere there is a public sector. And we've seen that really illustrated during COVID, when driver testing shut down for quite a long period, 45,000 too few tests, and then you can't get enough lorry drivers because you can't catch up on the backlog. But we see it elsewhere as well with those interfaces. We see it in HGV testing, when different measurements that maybe DVSA have to do MOTs on HGVs are very different to the private sector infrastructure around it. And we're going to see that when all the Brexit regulation, all the Brexit procedures that we've seen put in the World Trade, all of those procedures we have to be focusing on all the time. They're designed by governments, or government has the ability to unlock them. So we've got to be focusing all the time on public sector, private sector together. It can't be done separately. Private sector can't influence those regulations, those procedures. It has to be done together. So I would be looking at those as well as general investment. Let's get those regs right, and then we can keep that speed going through, which we need to be competitive and we need to thrive.
Excellent.
Angus, may I
Please do.
follow on a little bit? This thing is, so by the way, I like government funding, so if we can unlock some government funding, that would be very, very, very helpful. But beyond that, it's just the interest, right, and the general support. So one of the things that astounds me is that the short straits is the primary artery. And if your patient is having a heart attack, we're not, by the way, but why would you start putting plasters on toes, right? You'd be investing heavily to make certain your primary artery is the tip-top, healthiest, most resilient, highest functioning that it could be. And we do get some very good interest of that. As a bit of an illustration. So in the run-up to the end of transition, two models emerged. One was so-called, this is for customs clearance, so-called temporary storage model, which the container ports and the unaccompanied trailers can use. And then a new one was designed purely for the short straits, the so-called pre-lodgement model. And that meant that with that being put into place, our supply chains could remain as functioning, as high functioning as they could be. It's one example of where it's worked for us. There regrettably are a few more where it really hasn't worked for us.
Do you want to go into these, Doug?
Well, I mentioned the Thank you, Angus.
You don't have to. You don't have to. No, I'll spare you. I'll spare you. But I think so. I think sort of tilting slightly, and I think an interesting question to get your perspectives from all three of you on this. But as our trading policies, the UK's trading policy tilts, we're seeing more towards the Americas, more towards Oceania, and kind of thinking on that sort of global Britain piece. How does Dover remain very much at the forefront of the supply chain? I mean, there is obviously always going to be trade through that corridor and through Europe, but just I think from all of you, where we're sort of starting to think about trading further afield, what impact could that have on Dover, and how does Dover remain relevant in all of this? And I think whoever wants to
Huw, you want to go?
Well, I'll be brief because I don't run the businesses. Elizabeth and Doug do. I mean, all I would say is that we should be building on the trade we have with the EU, because it shouldn't be a question of one or the other. It should be both. Therefore, we should be opening up our export markets to growing economies. India is sort of one that comes to mind. But we should be doing that in addition to the trade we do with the EU. Because I come back to this, regional trading, and as we get even more onto a just-in-time logistic, means that we will be trading on a regional basis. So really it's a question of what extra opportunities can we deliver for our exporters, rather than let's sort of do less with Europe and more abroad. I'm very ambitious, I want it all.
Excellent. And for you,
yes, we shouldn't be artificially deciding this is the port that's going to win, this is the port that isn't. Why would we not want this efficient, attractive, affordable trade everywhere? And what would stop us from doing that?
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, I'd say so. You know, Dover, we're known for trading with Europe, and that is where a lot of the goods will come and go. And I think it is just as Huw and Elizabeth have said, it's not about choosing one bet over another bet. It's about maximizing everything. And you know what? Because Dover's 22 miles from our largest trading partner, it is always going to remain relevant. It has to, because unless there's another part of the United Kingdom that is going to move within 22 miles of the continent, then that geographic advantage will always be there. The other bit of geographic advantage is we are adjacent to the world's busiest shipping lane in the English Channel. And that is attractive for some of our other cargoes. So through the Port of Dover, we handle about 30% of the UK's consumption in bananas through a state-of-the-art refrigerated terminal facility. And one of the reasons they like coming here, because there's no deviation off the shipping lanes. They just literally kind of pull into Dover, discharge, and then they're off again. It's a very swift operation. And I think that there's this totality of supply chain resilience that needs to be looked at, because one of the things that we have also picked up is for people looking to source product, they're looking to source it over a range of places. They've had some hard hits given to them with the Ever Given stuck in the Suez Canal for a bit. Lack of containers in Brazil and throughout Central America and indeed out in Asia. And all of these things put pressure on their businesses. So if they can diversify their supply chains, which probably means having some stuff that is more near shore or indeed onshore, but I'll say near shore than the further ones away, then why wouldn't you do that? And if you can count on this robust mechanism to get your components or your goods to you exactly when you want them to be, why wouldn't you place that bet? It seems like a good one to me.
I must say as well, adding on, that the supply chain is always looking for the quickest route to anywhere. So that is something that does worry me about if we don't get hold of the entry-exit system and the regulations around that and change it, then it is bad news for you and Dover, Doug, because the supply chain will find another way, and it looks at generalised cost, and a 17-mile queue is pretty hard it's a big cost to the supply chain, so it then makes other routes more attractive.
Well, although, if I may.
You may tell us why it's not going to be that.
Certainly not with any sense of complacency about this, because disruption creates change and opportunity. As we've seen though, we had Insulate Britain down in Dover. You guys probably saw it on the news. And, it's also a really interesting thing that, where if you want to make a statement, where do you go? Well, you go to London, right, M25, maybe Parliament Square, something like that, or you go to Dover. And that's because people know that they can have high attention on that. Now, we did a bit of work over the last couple of years on what would it take to move 20%, only 20% of Dover's volume to other routes. And what it would take is an investment of between 2 and 3 billion pounds in new vessels that don't exist today. Not to mention the increased operating costs for the longer steam that they would have to do, the more dwell times that they would have to be able to cover, the inland storage facilities that they would have to also build in as a part of that. That is not, if we're looking for, tens of millions of pounds to help Dover out a little bit, it's a little bit different than going for 3 billion to build a bunch of ships that actually people don't want to use anyway because they prefer to use the route that they know. We did see during the Operation Stack period, I should say too, where that was back in 2015, 2016, where we had about 30 days of stack usage. The moment people preferred to wait in the queue because they knew that they would get away. They knew that it would work. They might have to wait a little bit, but they were confident that it would. And as soon as stack opened up, everything started flowing again.
The other thing, just to add on that, is in terms of, well, where would it be if it wasn't Dover? So as Doug says, we haven't even got the ships. The investment would be needed in the other ports. But if the alternative is in fact cargo via aviation, then we've just seen what's happened to the international travel market. It's collapsed. So 40% of everything that we bring in from outside the EU came in the belly of a plane into Heathrow. But those are passenger planes. There's no margin in cargo. Manchester Airport Group will tell you this about East Midlands. It doesn't make money for them. It's a cargo airport. So therefore that doesn't exist either. So people need to wise up. If Dover isn't doing it, there is actually no alternative. And that's why we've got to support Dover in what they do.
And I think one of the interesting things, thinking about the challenges presented by the entry-exit system as well, and as you said with Operation Stack, and we are very reliant at Dover through goods coming on via HGV, because as you're travelling across Europe, it's obviously the fastest way, and it makes sense. But do you think, and sort of thinking maybe about some other countries, that obviously each one of those HGVs, each one of those containers on the back of an HGV comes with a driver, and so there's that sort of people factor which does complicate the system. With trade opening up further around the world, is there an opportunity for more trade to come via cargo ships, where potentially you're not dealing with as many people relative to the amount of goods coming in? Is that, I don't know. Yeah.
Well, it is the speed, isn't it?
Yeah.
So you can use unaccompanied, even unaccompanied trailers, but it tends to not have your fresh produce. It's just a very different type of produce that we would be trading. Sure. If we were looking at elsewhere and from other areas of the world as well.
Okay.
I think in looking at it in other models, one of the things that we do is when we start thinking about, in Dover, when we start thinking about capacity and port capacity and that sort of stuff, well, we don't look at the land base because we actually have a very small footprint of land. We look at the systemic capacity, and that is going from end to end through the entire route. One of the things that you find is transport is most efficient when transport is moving. The moment you stop transport, it becomes inefficient. So if you are having a ship alongside for 4 hours while it discharges and reloads, that ship is not making any money. If you're having a trailer sit in a yard for 4, 6, 8 hours, a couple of days, that trailer is not making any money. And you've got to have the infrastructure and the investment in the assets that allows you to maintain that inefficiency in the system. Now, certainly what I'm not suggesting is that we are going to get accompanied shipments coming from China. I don't know that that would be the case. But as Elizabeth said, it is a different trade. It is just different.
Yeah, of course. And you mentioned, Elizabeth, strategic freight corridors and sort of that as a kind of opportunity going forward. Can you tell us a bit more about those?
Yeah, so we're just beginning to debate those. We're on what's called the DfT Freight Council, and that was the discussion at the last time that met. And it is about Transport for the North already have these, and that's how they assess particularly the movements through their areas and connecting the ports. But what appeals to us about it is it's a way of focusing that multimodal view of the world, where things are coming in and where they're going to in the UK, and particularly an opportunity to get the planning system behind it. And there to allow, you are on a freight corridor, you are important, you need to be, this is where we're going to be investing our infrastructure for both journey times and reliability, but also things such as driver facilities and rest areas and all the things that we found really hard to get planning for. So I think it has a lot of potential, particularly putting Britain in the forefront of a trading nation, and also in the context of our levelling up and opportunities throughout the UK. I think it's got a lot of merit behind it.
I'm glad Elizabeth's mentioned that, if I may, because I've been on the Transport Select Committee now for 6 years, and I've chaired it for a year. And going back some years, we obviously had the issue with Operation Stack and how the government was going to finally deliver the infrastructure in terms of a place where the lorries could go, which wasn't Manston Airport, because that's not the efficient route. And so I think it was George Osborne, I'm going back some years now, made a commitment that we would put a certain amount of money aside. I think it was 200 million, or maybe it wasn't as much as that. Anyway, the money was to be put aside. We had the lorry park at Stanton, I think, am I right? Is it Stanton or somewhere? Stamford, that's right. I remember their parish council were very cross because they came before the committee. Obviously, they weren't in favour, but everyone else tended to be. It was a great idea. And then the planning process got screwed up, but we never tried it again. And so actually, the reason I mention this is not because actually we need something for Operation Stack. We do, because it happens once every few years, and then when it does, we all think, why haven't we fixed this by now? It'll happen again. The reason I mention it is actually because the big talking point at the moment is we haven't got enough HGV drivers, and part of the reason for that is not because of pay, albeit that is an issue, but actually ask yourself, of an industry, why is it that only 1% of the workforce are women? In any other profession, that would be regarded as such a disgrace that we'd need to do something about it. Why only 2% under the age of 25? They won't work in that sector because the facilities are so poor. And as well as that lorry park facility being for Operation Stack, it was also to look after the driver's welfare and actually make it a comfortable job in terms of their rest. And it's never been built. And that, when we talk about what government can do, is a classic example where government ring-fenced the money to deliver this. Highways England, now National Highways, managed to stuff up the planning process, and then all of a sudden it just got buried. Where's the money, and where's that lorry park? It needs to be delivered, and I think that's the message we need to give to government.
Yeah, of course. And I think there's there's obviously challenges in there, but and crucially opportunities, that how we can adjust and adapt, and actually, we talk about formalising those setups with those lorry parks and things, but actually it wouldn't be huge amounts of money in terms of overall for the government to invest for it to deliver quite a large change to the industry and to the port as well, presumably. So I think probably pretty good opportunity to take some questions from around the room. So I think we've got a raving mic there. So yeah, we'll come down here first.
Thelma Mattock from Sun Coalfield. I actually use the Port of Dover very often, the P&O ferry between Dover and Calais. And my first point is, by May, I don't know how you can get this new entry-exit system in place. I mean, the infrastructure, even from a Calais side, even the weather can be so bad, even when you've got to get out of your car to get searched by the security there, it can be really windy and rain. So I think that's going to be a real challenge, and I don't know how that's going to happen. And then my other point is there's been so much money invested by the Home Office, more than 60 million, perhaps more, on dealing with immigration, which isn't working. And even if maybe 20% of that could be directed to rebuilding the infrastructure in Dover, perhaps making where the hovercraft area was to a tax-free port, big retail, tax-free retail or whatever, so people can stop before they go to the ferry port. There's so much that can be done. And I think the government needs to wake up and realise that time is of the essence and get some money invested, because as I've heard in this and using the port so often, that there's lots can be done, and speed is of the essence.
First of all, thank you very much for your custom. Really appreciate that. Anybody else? Ferry's a great way to travel post-COVID. You stay in your car through the whole bubble. You get on board the ferry, plenty of place to spit out. You can go out on deck. It's a beautiful way to travel. Thank you very much. So I'll just take a couple of points out of this. Point one, the EES. And it's going to interrelate a little bit with the immigration as well. Now, the reason why EES is an immigration check into the European Union. So where this will bite is in Europe at airports and ports where people get off of a plane or off of a ferry, and that's where it'll bite. And if it's going to go wrong, it'll be congested and backed up there. Where it's different in Dover or in the short straits, because it is also true with Eurotunnel, is that we operate our immigration as juxtaposed controls. Now, what that means is you actually clear French immigration in Dover. And likewise, coming back the other way, you clear UK immigration in Calais or Dunkirk. That enables a really quick movement of goods. Now, the reason why this was put in, this juxtaposed control, back in 2003, it came in international treaty, the Treaty of Le Touquet, and the primary mission of the Treaty of Le Touquet was to secure our borders. Because you may recall that at the time, small boats weren't being used, but rather people climbing into the back of lorries was a way in which the human traffickers were trying to get the people across. And it has been so successful in mitigating that. Okay, they found another outlet with the small boats. But what this does mean is that what we require from the EES is time. Time for the officials on both sides, both the UK and in France specifically, but Europe more widely, to design a process that is going to work for the ro-ro freight or the ro-ro traffic. To design that process, and then we need time to be able to build the infrastructure that will facilitate that. May 22, we had 4 years to prepare for Brexit. And we're actually delaying some of the inbound controls even today. May 22, 8 months away, right? How much design can take place? So what we need somebody central within government to take a hold of this and move it forward, because the downside of not getting it right is the Treaty of Le Touquet can't function because our juxtaposed controls are dangerous. And that means border security challenges. Now, where this comes in is you might say, but Doug, just tell me who in government should own this issue. And I'd really like to, but I can't. DFT's got an interest because it's about transport and the port and the knock-on stuff. Border Protocol and Delivery Group, the Brexit folks around the borders, they've got an interest because it has to do with border processes. Home Office have an interest because it has to do with border force and immigration. The Foreign Office has an interest because it is governed by international treaty, the Treaty of Le Touquet. And we've written to them. Many people have written to them, all of them. Nobody's really stepping forward to own the issue. And that's part of the challenge. 8 months away. I was just going to come back, one last thing if I may. The hoverport, we've already used it. Okay. We put a brand new state-of-the-art refrigerated cargo terminal there. And it's working well.
It's gentleman just in the middle there.
Thanks very much. My name's Nicholas Heslop. I'm a local councillor in West Kent. I'm also work for Lord Baker of Dorking. I've got two questions which are very brief. One, in terms of infrastructure, and I'm looking at the title of the fringe, which is delivering the competitive edge for global Britain. Looking at infrastructure, what's your view on a Lower Thames crossing? And the second question, which is around the skills agenda, actually how does your industry address the need for improved skills, and particularly around technical skills? Thank you.
So on the crossing, do you want to?
Yes, we are great fans of the crossing, but we'd like some trucker toilets at the crossing, please, and we haven't been able to get them put in there because that's very important as we are all now discovering for the industry as well. So that really helps with the resilience, really helps with throughput, really helps with that corridor traffic nationwide. In fact, it's important that additional crossing. As well. And your other question was about skills. So 3 o'clock this room, we're going to be talking at the Logistics UK's panel about level 2 and below skills, level 3 and above skills, and have we got the balance right in our economy. So I will be putting forward that perhaps we don't, because our skills shortages are very much at the level 2 and below, and lots of our funding for skills is at level 3 and above. So that's a fabulous topic that I'm very interested in.
Brilliant. And Huw, anything you want to add on that?
Just a shameless plug for the Transport Select Committee's report that was out last week on transport infrastructure and why it takes so long to deliver it and why it goes over budget and no one seems to be held responsible. And I mentioned both of those points because I think the transport infrastructure is vital. It's the investment that government can give to the industry. It's the platform for industry to then trade. But also in there is a big section about skills and the need to actually invest in our skills base. Because actually that to me is what government can do. We don't talk about it enough. But actually, as well as providing the tarmac, we actually need the skills base out there so that there is a workforce there ready to go as well. So both of your points actually are found inside that report, and I'd commend it to you.
Shamelessly plugging.
Brilliant.
Elizabeth's plugged the session this afternoon. Obviously, do please attend. And Hugh's plugged the report, and Doug's plugged all kinds of ferry travel and everything. So, yeah, excellent.
Can I?
Yeah, please do.
Jump in on this one too. So, infrastructure, big fan. Lower Thames Crossing, it's a game changer. You know what's got to come with it though? Dueling of the A2. So right now, Dover is probably the only port in Britain that has two primary routes directly to the dock entry and exit, right to the front of the docks. One of them is excellent. The A20, M20 is just a premier route. The A2 up to the M2, not so much. And so certainly about getting that corridor into a dual carriageway, that's going to provide a tremendous amount of resilience. And that's also, you know, if a theme is where can we lend support to your primary artery that we're exploring in this session a bit, then that is one of the areas that we could clearly have some support. I think overall infrastructure, transport infrastructure, we do need to be putting the bets down in the ones that are going to move the dial the most. And for me, of course, maybe A2 is a little bit closer to home, but anyhow. The other thing on the skills, so we do spend quite a bit of time in the industry wondering about our skills, and the labor market has become very tight recently. There's a number of construction jobs that are unfilled at the moment, and there's certainly in some of the work that we do in ports, which can be highly dangerous works. We've got mostly men, but men down in holds of ships moving big pieces of steel around and that sort of stuff. And it is dangerous work. And how do you begin to make that attractive for bringing new people into it? It can be a bit of a challenge. But we work with our universities in Kent. So Canterbury Christ Church, University of Kent. We also work with the Greenwich Maritime College in trying to identify how we start to attract people in. We also recently have taken in, we had to pause it because of the COVID, but just this September we had an intake of 11 apprentices spread right across all of our activities, from engineers to vessel traffic services people to marine services people to finance people to marketing people, and it's about trying to get that overall skills lifted back up again. Those were my points.
Thanks very much. I think there was one up the back there.
Tim Morris, UK Major Ports Group. The points that Doug made about the Port Infrastructure Fund, the lack of somebody to actually take hold of some of these issues, has done the remarkable job of uniting all the big ports in frustration about that. So, you get a lot of nodding along to that. Comprehensive spending review coming up. Freight as a system, all the panel members have mentioned that. We only seem as freight system to get in the public eye when things go wrong. What one thing could the comprehensive spending review do that would help freight as a system? You could have more than one, but just one as an example. Great
question. Huw, do you want to take this first?
Invest in rail. That's what I'd really like to see. So we actually take some of the freight off the road system, because as you say, it can have issues there. And our freight rail system, again, it's such tight margins. It's on a sort of knife edge often. And so investment into rail freight, to me, would be the one thing I would look to do.
And more sustainable too.
Absolutely.
That fits. Elizabeth?
So I can't do one. I can't do one.
Do 10.
We've got time.
So we've asked for rail investment at ports is really, really important. And there's also some other key arteries at other ports which are important. Driver facilities is out there. And all the time we have to be thinking about our carbon targets as well, and how are we going to deliver those. So we've got to take some of the comprehensive spending review investment and start putting some charging infrastructure in, or developing what the future is there as well. So I can't quite manage three. Well, can't manage one, so I think I've done three. Three would be all
Does
right.
Doug mind if I just come back on one thing? So I suppose the big question, given it's taxpayers' money, is why should the taxpayer actually pay for the facilities across the board? I think the taxpayer should pay for the sort of start-up of something to relieve us from Operation Stack. But across the board, I would challenge the industry, and therefore consumers, ultimately, because this will put the price up of food in Tesco's, so we might all have to pay. But it should be the industry to actually invest in its own facilities rather than the taxpayer. I would challenge it.
Yes, but I think it will involve some money at some places, because some of it will be Highways England sites, for example. So there will be some local authority and other spending. But one of the roles I see more for government actually is the convening. Because it won't be the industry, it will be different bits of the industry, and the planning system is so important. We've got somewhere with Highways England, but they're waiting for each local plan to come up, then having a chat. Can you be persuaded to put some in your local area? But it is that strategic, this is the plan, this is what we need to be doing, and the convening role. It may not cost lots and lots. There may be very different ways of investing, but I think it will be something, and is an important part of the comprehensive spending review.
And our infrastructure report talks of the need for planning reform and indeed legal reform, because often the courts stuff things up as well. So another plug.
But again, it's that public, it's that sort of public-private partnership
Public-private,
spoken about already.
Public-private.
Yeah, great. And
I think on Tim's question, for me, where the government can make some reasonable investment out of the comprehensive spending review, I think that there's this piece on really taking a really objective look on where the money does need to be spent, because there's some things where it is not particularly clear to me how those decisions are made for some investments to happen and some investments not to happen. And I think, informed by the criticality of the chains or the businesses that it supports, I think that would be a really good objective look. I think that there's a clear piece around moving things forward on the sustainability agenda. And I think that if that was coming out, so as an example, we've set up a group called the Dover Clean Ferry Fund or project. And what this does is this is looking at what the future power of ferries might look like, and therefore how does that then fit into port infrastructure that's required, and how business will be conducted, and so we're doing that now. That's benefited from a bit of pump priming from some grant funding. But I think when we're considering about investing in transport, investing in infrastructure, we need to be thinking 30, 40, 50. Some of our assets down in Dover are a couple hundred years old, and the world is going to be really different. I don't think 30 years from now we know there's going to be no fossil fuel powered vehicles around, right? None. And yet our entire system, our ways are just fueled around doing that. So we need to be thinking about delivering transport in a completely different way than how it is done today. And that's going to yield some pretty awesome innovation. So I think getting some thinking going on along that will be really important. If there was something that could come up from the comprehensive spending review about that, it could be cool.
Just building on that, do you think the net zero targets and the sort of the shift to sort of a greener focus is actually quite a useful tool in the pitch to government for how we then invest in transport, where we might otherwise not be sort of have the opportunity to have that funding, that if it's sort of dressed up very much as if we're funding for this purpose, that's maybe the way to go.
It is actually. And some welcome changes to the Treasury's Green Book. So where the Treasury decides it can invest money. I mean, previously, I had this discussion when I used to work for Philip Hammond. It was always about where can the Treasury get the biggest bang for the buck in terms of a return. So that meant that, you know, between Oxford and Cambridge was a pretty good bet. But now the Green Book rules have changed such that rather than just looking primarily at the return, you can look at actually what's the return with regard to delivering net zero. So that's a factor, and also levelling up, albeit our report asks, what does that, does the government really know what the definition of levelling up is? I don't think it does. And therefore it's then important to make sure that in investing in those two areas, you can still demonstrate some value for money, because whilst it may be a bit crude to do the Oxford-Cambridge test, at least you know if it's going to yield a return. Whereas these other two, and I call them sort of white-green elephants, we could end up with. So yes, to answer your question, there is the opportunity now to invest. The Treasury allows it, but we must ensure that we don't waste taxpayers' money on sort of follies.
Okay, I think there was another question down the front here.
Thank you. Mark Simmons from the British Ports Association. My question is to everyone, what do you see the future of just-in-time logistics as, given all the problems or challenges we've had in the last couple of years? Are companies going to hold more stock, or will they overcome this and continue as normal?
To you first, Elizabeth.
Yes, probably during COVID I was talking about will be stock increases, but I think there's such a drive in the logistics sector for efficiency that will be a short-term measure, and it will be about getting the system as a whole to work again as it was. It is very hard for industries to move backwards, and that would be seen as a backward move. So I think it's still about pushing forward so that can be where we get to again, and that pragmatic decision making around the big adjustments in different markets and how we work and operate in our post-COVID big bump that we're going through at the moment. So I don't think it will go away. We'll get back to it, but it will just be a bit of time.
Doug?
Yeah, Mark, I also think that there's a really cool thing here with technology and digital stuff, right? So the more that we can understand about where the components are in the whole system, then we can start to build in some, maybe with artificial intelligence too, some thinking around how do I improve the resilience in it? Because I think it's the resilience in it rather than changing the model from stock holding and having a huge warehouse next to a factory where you've got to get a bunch of people to go in there and pull stock out of it. I think it's the warehouse is the supply chain, and I think that works really well. I think also, if you think about where else can I find resilience in my supply chain, it is also around the near-shoring, I think. So if you're reliant on a manufacturer of Akampuckis in China, and the Akampuckis then take, from order to delivery 10, 12 weeks to arrive, if it's running smoothly, with a bit of congestion, it might be 20 weeks, or a bit of disruption, it might be 20 weeks. But also to know that I can pick up some Akampuckis from I don't know, Brussels, and know that you can do that. And actually, if I place my order now, six hours from now, I'll have it. It might cost a little bit more or whatever, but you will have inbuilt that resilience. And importantly, if you've got this data network to really understand where all your components are, then you can optimize it a bit. I think that is something really interesting.
Huw, anything you want to add on that?
Just to say, I'm a bit of a geek on this. I love the just-in-time nature of the industry, and I think it's only when things go wrong that we actually start to question it. Most of the time, it works brilliantly, and it's become even more efficient. So I think keep the faith is the point I would make. But equally, I think sometimes we sort of make our own problems even worse. So if you look, for example, at the fuel issue, out of about 3,500 HGV fuel drivers, we're about 350 short. So that's a 10% drop, and that's been the case for some time. And yet, when we talk about it, we have a 500% increase in demand from people panic buying. That's why the pumps have run dry. So, there are isolated issues, and if you really consider what we've been through in a pandemic, and the world came out of its hibernation with different parts of the global economy, actually in different parts of the world, it's not a surprise that we have had issues, actually. And again, I would say it's been remarkable how well we have coped, thanks to our industry. So sometimes I think we doom and gloom ourselves into a position rather than being realistic with the public. I think the government could be more realistic about the challenges rather than saying, we're over it now, let's all have a party. But at the same time, don't panic, I think is my message.
And then I think there was a question up at the back there.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay? Yes, great. Alex with Logistics UK. It's a question to Doug, but I'd like a comment from the panel if that's okay. So, Doug, I think we've got a few things coming up on Dover's agenda, as well as the EES. You've got the, hopefully, restart of tourism, and the next final set of inbound Brexit controls in January, and then later in the year with food products. So, and then EES in May. My question really is, how can we land this with government? Because in lots of ways with Brexit, actually, we did manage to land privately. You've got to do X or Y, otherwise we're really going to have a problem. I think more recently, things have got pretty bad before we've landed points about things that might help. Doug, how do you think it's going in terms of getting that government engagement across the piece, whether it's Brexit or the EES, which you've spoken about already? And then perhaps Huw and Elizabeth might be able to help us think about how to land these points where we're struggling. I mean, EES is a great example of where we're just struggling to get the point through. So thank you.
Sure, Doug, do you want to kick off on?
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Thanks, Angus. Thanks, Alex. So we have we kind of missed the tourism season this year with the delays in bringing about changes to the border. So we had as Huw mentioned, this Amber Plus category that was made up for France, which didn't help. And it's only this month where we're starting to see an easing of the testing regime. And what that has meant is that, we've kind of written off the summer. Maybe we get a decent half term, maybe a decent Christmas run at it. But, it's true that we were certainly not doing in a normal year, we do 10.5, 11 million passengers a year. That's outside of the big London airports. It's probably the 5th or 6th busiest airport in the UK, so it's substantial. The other aspect of tourism that has got off to a decent start is cruising. So Dover's the second largest cruise port in the United Kingdom. And we started off with the summertime with these domestic cruises, which did prove pretty popular, actually. And we've started our international cruise program from September this year, and that's kicked into gear, which is really quite good. Now, on the inbound controls, one of the things that I have asked some folks in government about. So in the lead up to the end of the transition period, one of the key things for the outbound checks to be done, one of the key things to make certain it happened successfully was so-called trader readiness. And what this was about was making certain that people can conduct the business in a post-Brexit environment. So they had their customs agents in place, they had their insurances in place, they had all the admin in place that they needed to do. The inbound, which are the controls, as Alex said, coming in beginning of next year. On the inbound, it all has to be done over in Europe. And we're not getting any sort of advice on what the trader readiness is for the Europeans to actually conduct the paperwork in a good way. And I don't know that anybody's really talking about it. I'm a little nervous about that, to be honest with you. And then on the EES, I think the EES is one of these good but tragic examples of if there was a clear home for this and somebody really felt accountable to this, I have no doubt that it would move, because government can do that very well. The problem is that there's not one clear accountability in it, and that is a challenge. So whilst we have a lot of interest from a lot of departments and a lot of people in departments around, well, somebody must do something. Somebody must do something about this. It's clear. Why isn't anybody doing anything? Somebody must do something. But nobody is, or at least insufficient. And so if there was a way in which we could get good central attention onto this topic, I think that would be very important.
And Elizabeth, just following up on that and the sort of engagement with government.
Yeah, I've not given up on the Board and Protocol Delivery Group for Cabinet Office. We've seen them do great things in the past. and that it's run by some very strong people indeed. I was just having a little look. I talked about the 2050 border strategy and the areas that we're already working on through this UK Border Expert Advisory Group that we're on, and we're looking at improving the processes for checks to deliver a better user experience. So we're looking at 2025. Work started there. We've been talking about engaging RoRo as part of the processes there, but yet we're missing something very near term. So I'm big fans of theirs, and we will make sure that this is part of these ongoing agendas for discussion and highlighting.
And Huw, from the sort of parliamentarian side of it, what's the best way for these issues to get raised up the agenda?
So I think Dominic Cummings was right when it came to civil service reform. So let me give you an example of this. So before I became an MP, I ran the legal team that on the Lehman Brothers estate. It was the largest bankruptcy. And the joint administrator was really clever in the sense that he would sit with a room full of people, like me. I'd sort of say, well, these are my views, there'll be other people, and we'd sort of have to debate it out, and he'd read the room and just decide. You could see which way the room was going in terms of the right thing to do, and that's how he would then make his decisions. We need that at the heart of government. So you have lots of departments with lots of interest, and you mentioned, Alex, international travel. That's a classic. So you have the health department that, of course, to a certain extent, don't want to unlock, because if you get a variant of concern, then it's all down on them. So you can see why they would drag the heels. You have the Department for Transport that really wanted to support its industry, so we're trying to push for more. So they're the complete opposite. You have the Foreign Office involved. You have the Home Office, who maybe don't want as much travel because they can't deal with it border force-wise, and then they'll get the blame. So you need one joint administrator, to use my analogy. That should be the Cabinet Office, but it doesn't have the clout. What do you do to address that? You make it the number 10 Cabinet Office. You move the Cabinet Office into number 10, it has the clout, it then bangs the heads together, works out what needs to be done, and ensures it gets done across government. I'm not saying that was a Dominic Cummings idea, but it's the kind of thing that he was actually interested in working on. We've lost this ambition of reforming the way government delivers. It doesn't properly deliver. The examples Doug's given, and we could all give a few more. It needs radical change, and I'm worried that the government has sort of moved off that radical change agenda, and as a result, things get stuck.
Sure. So I think next question down the front here.
Thank you. Matthew Grigger, Associated British Ports. We've touched on some of the challenges facing the RoRo sector in particular, on lorry driver shortages, on Brexit controls, on decarbonisation, in fact. I'd be interested in the panel's views on where there might be opportunities for modal shift and the extent to which that could actually bring environmental benefits and indeed some benefits to UK trade resilience.
Do you want to kick us off? I know you've spoken about kind of that modal shift already.
So one of the most exciting things for me to happen in the past year was when the William Shapps Rail Review was announced, we had a rail freight growth target. Hurrah! So before then it had been some ORR, you must think about freight, or something so passive it was untrue. So to get a target for rail freight growth, we don't know what it is. But to have one, in essence, is very hopeful, because every port, when we speak to them, is wanting rail. We want to do things by rail. So there's an appetite, absolute appetite, but this is government and private sector together, and that target really helps with the capacity of the network and decision making. So the next thing to help with that is a lovely new coefficient for freight to go in all our economic investment models in government, and I'm hoping that comes in soon. Freight is currently priced at the value of time for the driver, not the value of the goods in the back. So I've got my target and now I want my coefficient.
Anything either of you want to add?
Yeah, I think that there's a couple of interesting things about this. So first of all, the HGV driver shortage hasn't affected our business. Primary reason for that is because they're all international drivers that come in, they drop their load, and then they go back out again. What it has affected is the domestic distribution. So once the goods are in the inland DC, or at the container port, or at the unaccompanied trailer port, or at the inland rail terminal, that's where it's creaking. Our business has been unaffected by it. So it actually benefits the supply chain by operating in the way that we do. One of the things that I've been thinking about as we start considering what our 30-year strategy is in Dover, which is a piece of work that we're working on right now, is what does it look like? So if we take it for a given that there's going to be no more fossil fuel powered vehicles anymore, it's going to be something else. Maybe electric, maybe hydrogen for the big ones. But then all of a sudden, the argument around the sustainability of road traffic kind of falls away, because it is equivalent to, if not exactly the same, or even maybe a bit better than rail, depending on the cost of inputs and the carbon cost of inputs. And if you were to think about that in 30 or 40 years' time, why would you be putting freight onto the rail? Why not optimize the rail network for passengers to get people around the country a little bit more efficiently, and then maybe start investing in a different way to deliver the freight? Maybe by sea, around the edges, because we've been, certainly I know ABP, you've been involved in a lot of that as well. And I think that there's some interesting stuff around that. But I guess my main point is, I'm not an advocate. I'm an advocate of rail freight, by the way. I think that is really good. But once you start folding in where we are with the climate change and the carbon agenda, the new technologies and the new targets coming in, it does mean that the world's changing.
Yeah, of course.
And the only thing I'd add is, and again, it's bizarre this, so it just shows that there are some sort of quick wins. So, as we know, transport is the sector that delivers the largest carbon footprint, and it's been stubborn in its unwillingness to reduce, whereas other sectors have. And 70% of the sort of 1/3 that transport is responsible for is surface transport. So, of course, rail freight is key to this. But I'll give you a local example. So Network Rail on my line down to Hastings, so down to the coast, are shoring up the track, and all the spoil is being removed by lorry through country lanes, taking HGV drivers off essential work, and all of the new materials to shore it up is being brought in by lorry, despite the fact, I'm not suggesting you could just dump it off the side of a freight truck, but the fact that you can't actually deliver it at a time when the timetable has been reduced because of the pandemic and people aren't using the rail service as much, means there's that opportunity. Yeah, if you think of that example I give you, which is nonsensical, then it shows that there are some easy wins in the process, as well as a long-term strategy.
But again, and I guess just to follow up on that, again, is that just about someone needing to take ownership for those decisions?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, if you look at the public sector, so Network Rail, for example, has a target that 30% of its contracts must go to SMEs. So we should also see those targets in terms of the amount of business Network Rail itself does on freight as well. I mean, one of the government's targets for 2030, the end of the sale of combustion engines, is aggressive, but sometimes you just need to sort of leave the grenade there to go off so that everyone runs around and does something about it. So, there's a role for government in setting targets. I absolutely agree.
Sure. I think our next question was down the front. Yeah, got.
Thanks. Good morning, everyone. Richard Ballantyne from the British Ports Association. There's a question first for Doug, and be interested in if Huw and Liz have any views on this, perhaps from the political angle. But you mentioned the entry-exit system coming in, whereby Dover and presumably Eurotunnel have to provide the facilities for the French immigration officers. So if you're unsuccessful, Doug, and in convincing government to pay for new facilities, etc., is it slightly melodramatic to expect that the French may say, well, why do we need this treaty anymore? And as you said earlier, the treaty's been really successful from a UK point of view about keeping the kind of people out that the government wants to see restricted from travelling into the country.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. I think I'll break it down in two different things. One is the infrastructure, two is the process or the agreement. The process and the agreement, first of all, that needs definition. And it could be that it's very easy to do, and there's a new bit of technology that can scan a vehicle, pick up faces in a vehicle, and it all will work seamlessly. The problem is that they haven't designed it, they haven't researched it, and they don't know that this exists. So they need to be doing that, because to force an airport-styled model on us, we couldn't do it. If it was dangerous, it would be dangerous for people to exit their vehicles in the middle of busy lanes. So we just couldn't do that. It would be just too high risk, right? So we need somebody to hold on to the definition. And in fact, what we really need is we need time for people to think, consider, develop, discuss, and get it done. The other one is around the infrastructure, which we had this project that we identified back in 2018, the Outbound Controls Project. It was identified specifically due to the UK's exit from the European Union. At that point in time, it didn't have any consideration of EES. And because we knew that it was going to, a couple things happened. So first of all, our existing layout in Dover is the first people you come to in the port is Police aux Frontières, PAF, the French immigration people. Then you come to UK Border Force, and then you go check in for your ferry. So if you think about it, you enter France, and then you leave the UK, all before your intention to travel. And that is a challenge in the process. It was okay when the borders were more fluid. Now that there's an actual border check in place, there's some really big problems about that. But the other thing too is with the increased transaction times, we need more capacity to be able to handle the same volume of traffic through the port. So part of the project was doubling the border authorities' capacity from 5 booths to 10 booths. So it's doubling the capacity so that if it's a more manual process, we can still maintain the volume. Now, we had felt that this was a good project for government to invest in. It had to do with post-Brexit border issues. It was specifically geared around ensuring that the traffic can continue to flow. And it was overall governed by an international treaty, the Treaty of Lutuke, which said, what's the nature of the infrastructure that both nations need to provide to each other's border agents. We were guided towards the Port Infrastructure Fund as a primary place. It didn't matter to us whether it came out of the Port Infrastructure Fund or it came out of somewhere else. But we were guided to that. We made application. Things were looking pretty good for a while. And then against the 33 million that we had asked for, we didn't get 3.3 million. We didn't get 330,000. We got 33,000. Which is rather insufficient. And we couldn't take it anyway because we didn't ask for it, for what it was supposed to be funding. So that has left a real hole in our planning because we've got tremendous infrastructure to reinvest in down the port. We've got something like 170 million pounds to spend on core assets to facilitate the business over the next 5 or 7 years. On top of that, we've got some key transformative projects like finishing off our Dover Western Docks revival program. And all these things require funding. Because we are a trust port, we don't have any external shareholders that we've got no access to the capital markets. So we can't tap for more money. The only thing that we can do is secure loans. And we're pretty much maxed out on the debt that we can carry right now, although we're looking at it a little bit more. So it becomes so imperative if we are going to continue to provide this primary artery, this hugely important supply chain, to make certain that we can get some support from time to time.
Elizabeth, do you want to follow up on that?
Well, I think in terms of value for money, you're spending on infrastructure to solve a process problem that you haven't designed well enough. And I would not want to give up on moving forward some pragmatic decision-making, testing for ro-ro, so that there's a better way found of doing the whole process than just spending more on infrastructure to solve a problem that could be negotiated and work around with some people applying themselves to solve a problem, and that pragmatic view of the world being the one that dominates first.
And Huw's political.
Yeah, Richard touched on the political, and actually Thelma raised this as well. And I think the issue to me is that when we were confronted with EU rules, which we thought were crackers, we decided just to leave so that we could make our own. This is an example where this is all about the ability to actually get into mainland EU. Therefore, they apply to us whether we're in it or not. So, question, have we lost some of our influence? I suspect we have. How do we actually get that back, and how do we optimise it? And I think, again, maybe it's the Irish blood in me, but if 40% of everything that Ireland is exporting comes through Dover, then we need to rely on the Irish, who've always been fantastic at working their way through the European Commission and holding the best post, particularly in commerce. So what can the Irish do to help this situation? And then secondly, can we just stop beating up on the French? We're giving them money in order to try and help control the borders. We should actually be talking up the fact that since we've paid the French that money, the number of crossings that they've foiled has doubled. So yes, it's not working largely because people aren't able to come in on lorries, so that we're seeing them on dinghies, but there has actually been some success in that. So let's build relations with France. Let's not put them on the Amber Plus list. Let's not give them a sort of public lecturing about what more they can do, so that we have the influence in the room to persuade them that if this is nuts for us, then it's nuts for them and their trade as well, and therefore needs to change. That would be my political view.
We've probably got time for one or two more questions if there are any around the room. One up the back there. Thank you.
So, John Stevenson, I work for a number of ports, and we seem to be in sort of violent agreement in the room. So I was just going to put something else forward. Are we not talking about investing further in a sort of single point of failure? And I sort of look at the system, whether it's the sort of charging regime within the sort of BCPs, the Eland BCPs, or the declaration system, or the treaty. It's all in the sort of short straits favour, and yet we're talking about a market-based approach. So if it's about the market, why are we sort of talking about at large scale bringing forward government funding to facilitate this single point of failure further? It's just...
So should I come back on that? Look,
Yep.
It's great. I mean, shake the room up in that sense. But, you know, to me, it's about the market. And if the market decides actually that the shortest point of crossing, because we're even more into a just-in-time supply chain, is the Dover crossing, then that's where the market goes, and it's government's job to actually help that market go there. So if the market actually decided that it wanted a bit more of Felixstowe or further up north, then, not least because of warehousing tends to be there, then actually it would go there. So I believe that it's market forces that makes Dover as attractive as it is, and the government's job should be to support the market, would be my riposte back, John.
Elizabeth, does that sort of
Yeah.
return on investment?
Well, support fast, fluid trade through all of the UK's ports. If any port was having a problem with new entry-exit systems and difficulties politically reaching agreement, we'll be right in there supporting them. We just don't think, why can we not have it all everywhere? We're supporting Transpennine work. It's a good thing for the country. It's a good thing for logistics. It's a good thing for our resilience. I can't see any bad things in wanting to be involved in making Dover work well, as we would be with any port wanting it to work well.
Yeah, thanks, Agnes. Thanks, John. I think there is this point that both Huw and Elizabeth made, that the market's already made that decision, and unless the government is going to become market interventionist and try to influence the market in other ways by providing breaks or subsidies or other things to try and make some routes more attractive than others, on a balanced level playing field, then the market's chosen Dover and continues to choose Dover. So the thing is that then if you think of it as a single point of failure, one of the things that you do is that then you're looking at it on a risk basis. So then what you need to do is you need to put in place all the risk mitigations that you can, and that is, 2 good motorways out of the port, maybe getting a bit of balance. So actually we've got, in the short straits, we've got a rail option with Eurotunnel as well as a sea option. There's all this inbuilt resilience that we've got 3 ferry operators, not relying on just one to provide the route. So there's all this inbuilt resilience. So you look at these risk mitigations and you can begin to build up a package of risk mitigations for the single point of failure. But I would challenge you, John. I would turn it around and say, why are we calling it a single point of failure? Why aren't we calling this incredible asset that the nation has and celebrate it? And hurrah, let's get it working really well, because it's all about the Dover route. Because with the Dover route, look at all this great stuff that we get. So let's put more money in.
You succeeded in firing up Doug, certainly.
Doug's had his wheat of it.
That coffee's kicked in. Well, brilliant. Thank you all for kind of the questions around the room. And certainly thanks to all of our panellists. Do make sure you join us later for the Logistics UK session. Do make sure you read the Select Committee report. Yep. And do make sure you continue to use Dover and take ferries wherever you may go. But certainly, I think in sort of summing up, I think the kind of key word behind the question, or the sort of the topic that we're looking at today, is very much about that resilience. And I think that is where we have the competitive edge for Dover, is that Dover is resilient. It remains relevant even as we kind of adapt our kind of trading regime. But there are obviously challenges and opportunities ahead. And certainly kind of investment and engagement from government, not just with government, but from government, is going to be essential and crucially, not just investment in the port itself, but across the whole system. So thank you all for joining us. And we'll hope to see you again at Conservative Home event soon. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.